The sun was setting over Savannah, Georgia, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink as Laura Pierce stared at the foreclosure notice in her trembling hands. The year 2018 had been merciless to the 37-year-old designer. First, she lost her job at a prestigious interior design firm after a corporate merger eliminated her position. Then her husband Mark announced he was leaving her for his young colleague, a woman barely out of college. Now, with their 10-year-old daughter Emily to support and only meager alimony payments coming in, Laura faced the terrifying reality that the bank was about to take their suburban home due to months of missed mortgage payments. The small severance package from her job had long since been depleted, and job interviews had yielded nothing but polite rejection emails. Laura had been skipping meals to ensure Emily could eat properly, and the stress had left her 15 pounds lighter and perpetually exhausted. She had already sold her jewelry, including her wedding ring, to keep the electricity on. The foreclosure notice felt like the final nail in the coffin of her former life. Salvation arrived unexpectedly in the form of a certified letter from a notary public. Laura tore it open with little hope, then stood frozen in her kitchen, rereading the contents in disbelief. According to the document, she had inherited property from a distant relative she had never even heard of. Edward Pierce, her father's second cousin, had passed away with no immediate family, and as the closest living relative, Laura was the sole heir to his estate, an old Victorian mansion in the coastal town of Port Haven, about an hour's drive from Savannah. The property came with outstanding taxes and maintenance issues, but it was free and clear of mortgage debt. The notary's letter included photographs of a 3-story structure with peeling paint, shuttered windows, and an overgrown garden looking like something from a Gothic novel. Despite its dilapidated appearance, it represented something precious to Laura and Emily, a roof over their heads when they needed it most. 3 days later, Laura and Emily stood before the iron gates of Pierce Manor, their modest sedan packed with the few belongings they had managed to keep. The Victorian mansion loomed before them, even more imposing in person than in the photographs. Built in the late 19th century, it featured ornate woodwork, a wraparound porch, and a small turret room on the 3rd floor. Years of neglect had left the once white paint gray and peeling, several windows were cracked or boarded up, and the garden had grown wild, nearly obscuring the stone pathway to the front door. Laura noticed the neighbors watching from their porches and windows as she fumbled with the ancient key. The local reaction to their arrival seemed to range from curiosity to outright suspicion. Later, they would learn that the Pierce house was something of a local legend. For the past 30 years, strange occurrences had been reported, lights turning on in empty rooms, eerie music playing in the dead of night, and shadowy figures seen through the windows. The previous owner, Edward Pierce, had been a recluse who rarely left the property and had died under mysterious circumstances. Some locals claimed the house was haunted or cursed, while others dismissed these stories as small-town superstition. As they pushed open the heavy oak door, the hinges protesting with a haunting creak, a musty odor of abandonment enveloped them. Inside, sheets draped the furniture like ghosts, thick layers of dust covered every surface, and cobwebs adorned the corners and chandeliers. Emily clutched her mother's hand tighter, her initial excitement giving way to apprehension. Despite the eerie atmosphere, Laura felt an unexpected sense of connection to the place, as though the house had been waiting for them. That night, they cleared enough space in what appeared to be the master bedroom to set up their air mattress. As Emily finally drifted to sleep, Laura sat by the window watching the moonlight cast strange shadows through the trees onto the overgrown lawn. For the first time in months, despite the uncertainty ahead, she allowed herself to feel a glimmer of hope. They had a home again, strange and intimidating as it might be. In the following days, Laura and Emily began the daunting task of making the mansion habitable. They cleaned one room at a time, uncovering furniture that, beneath the dust covers, proved to be antique and valuable. The first strange occurrence happened on their 3rd night, when they both woke to the sound of footsteps on the stairs, though they found no one when they checked. Soon other peculiarities manifested. Doors that had been firmly closed would be found open in the morning, objects would be moved from where they had been left, and occasionally they would catch whiffs of perfume with a distinctly old-fashioned scent. James Foster, the local librarian, became their first friend in Port Haven. A kind man in his early 40s with prematurely graying hair and intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, he approached them one afternoon as they were purchasing cleaning supplies at the town's small hardware store. He offered to help with some of the heavier work around the house and, more importantly, shared his knowledge of local history. Over cups of tea served on the mansion's newly cleaned porch, James explained that the house had a troubled past. Built by shipping magnate Cornelius Pierce in 1886, it had been a symbol of prosperity until a series of disappearances in the 1950s cast a shadow over the family name. The most notable was Eleanora Pierce, a talented pianist who had vanished without a trace in 1952, just before her planned concert debut in New York. Since then, the house had passed through several branches of the Pierce family, none staying for long. While cleaning the cluttered attic, Laura discovered a locked door to a small room that wasn't visible from the outside of the house. After finding an old key ring in Edward's desk, she managed to open it and discovered what appeared to be a music room frozen in time. A thick layer of dust covered everything. A writing desk with yellowed sheet music still open, a bookshelf filled with musical texts and journals, and photographs in tarnished silver frames. The centerpiece of the room was a portrait of a strikingly beautiful young woman seated at a grand piano, her expression intense and passionate. The nameplate on the frame identified her as Eleanora Pierce. Below the portrait, Laura found leather-bound journals dating from 1945 to 1952, all written in an elegant, flowing script. They detailed Eleanora's musical education, her compositions, and her struggles to be taken seriously as a female composer in the post-war era. The final journal ended abruptly in the middle of an entry dated May 15, 1952, 2 days before her documented disappearance. That night, Laura was awakened by the soft sound of piano music coming from the drawing room downstairs. The melody was haunting and unfamiliar, unlike anything she had heard before. When she went to investigate, the music stopped and she found the piano exactly as it had been, closed and covered. The next morning, Emily casually mentioned that she had dreamed of a lady in an old-fashioned dress showing her how to play the piano, though Emily had never taken a single lesson. The strange events continued and intensified. Sheet music would appear on the piano overnight, arranged as if waiting to be played. The portrait of Eleanora seemed to change subtly. Sometimes her expression appeared sadder, other times there was a hint of a smile that hadn't been there before. Emily began to speak of her friend who lived in the walls and taught her songs, and to Laura's astonishment, the child began to pick out complex melodies on the piano, displaying a talent neither of her parents possessed. The situation took a new turn when Harrison Craig arrived in Port Haven. Tall, impeccably dressed, and exuding wealth and influence, he introduced himself as a real estate developer interested in historic properties. He offered to buy Pierce Manor for 3 times its market value, claiming he wanted to restore it to its former glory as part of a luxury hotel complex. His interest seemed excessive, and his knowledge of the house's layout was suspiciously detailed for someone who claimed never to have been inside. Laura politely declined his offer, increasingly intrigued by the mystery of Eleanora Pierce and unwilling to part with what now felt like both a sanctuary and a puzzle to be solved. Craig's charming facade briefly slipped, revealing a flash of anger before he smoothly assured her that his offer would remain open should she reconsider. As he drove away in his sleek black luxury car, Laura felt a cold sensation of being watched, not by the living, but by something else entirely. With James's help, Laura delved deeper into researching the house's history and the life of Eleanora Pierce. At the town's small historical society, they discovered old newspapers documenting Eleanora's rise as a musical prodigy and her sudden disappearance. They also found mentions of her engagement to William Craig, a wealthy businessman and, Laura realized with a shock, the grandfather of Harrison Craig, the man so eager to purchase the house. Further research revealed that Eleanora had studied music theory and composition at a time when such pursuits were considered unusual for women. Critics who had heard her early works described them as revolutionary, blending traditional structures with innovative approaches that challenged the musical conventions of the time. More significantly, shortly before her disappearance, she had mentioned to a journalist that she was working on a new theory of musical composition that would change how we understand the mathematical foundations of harmony. Laura became convinced that Eleanora's disappearance and her musical innovations were somehow connected. Her suspicions grew when she found a hidden compartment in the baseboard of the attic music room containing a stack of letters between Eleanora and various music publishers. The correspondence revealed that William Craig had been pressuring Eleanora to allow him to take credit for her theoretical work, positioning himself as the business mind behind her creative genius once they were married. The final letter, from Eleanora to her mentor at Juilliard, expressed her decision to break off the engagement and publish her work independently. That evening, the piano played by itself for nearly an hour, the melody building to a frantic crescendo before stopping abruptly. In the silence that followed, Laura and Emily heard the sound of weeping coming from the walls. When Laura went to investigate, she found that someone, or something, had written "Beware the Craigs" in the condensation on the bathroom mirror. The supernatural events escalated alongside very real threats. Anonymous phone calls in the middle of the night. A small fire that started mysteriously in the garage but was fortunately discovered before it could spread. Rocks thrown through windows while they slept. Laura reported these incidents to the local police, but without evidence linking them to any specific person, little could be done. When she mentioned Harrison Craig as a possible suspect, the officer seemed uncomfortable and advised her not to make accusations against important people without proof. James introduced Laura to Olivia Rivera, a professor of musicology at the Savannah College of Arts who specialized in underrepresented composers of the 20th century. After examining the compositions and notebooks found in the attic, Professor Rivera was astonished. Eleonora's theories about mathematical patterns in music and their psychological effects were decades ahead of their time. If published and properly attributed today, they would be worth millions in potential applications ranging from film scoring to music therapy. Moreover, her compositions, if authenticated and performed, would establish her as one of the most innovative composers of the mid-20th century. News of the discovery spread quickly through academic circles. Music publishers, universities, and performing arts institutions began reaching out, expressing interest in Eleonora's work. Local media picked up the story of Porthaven's lost musical genius, bringing unwanted attention to Laura and Emily. The increased scrutiny coincided with a heightening of both supernatural occurrences and real-world threats. Laura woke one morning to find several pages missing from Eleonora's notebooks. The piano would play violently at all hours, sometimes accompanied by the sound of a woman shouting indistinguishably. Objects would fly off shelves when Harrison Craig's name was mentioned. Most disturbingly, Emily reported that her friend was becoming increasingly agitated, warning that he's coming back to finish what he started. The situation reached a breaking point when Laura received an envelope containing a photograph of Emily at school with a note that simply read, "Reconsider my offer." Terrified for her daughter's safety, Laura sent Emily to stay with her sister in Atlanta while she remained behind to protect Eleonora's legacy and solve the mystery once and for all. The house seemed to respond to Emily's absence with increased paranormal activity. Laura would wake to find all the doors in the house standing open. The piano played constantly, repetitive and frustrated, as though trying to communicate something specific. Papers would blow about in rooms with no draft, and the portrait of Eleonora now seemed to be overtly watching Laura's movements, its eyes following her around the room. During a particularly violent thunderstorm, Laura heard a tremendous crash from the drawing room. She found that a section of the hardwood flooring had buckled upward as though pushed from below. Using a crowbar from the garage, she pried up the damaged boards to reveal a small space beneath. Inside was a metal case, sealed and protected from the elements, containing what appeared to be Eleonora's missing final works, including an unfinished symphony and a complete manuscript of her music theory. Most damning of all was a journal documenting William Craig's threats and her fear that he would resort to violence to obtain her work. The final entry, dated the day of her disappearance, indicated her plan to hide her most important compositions and flee to Europe, where she had arranged to work with a prominent conductor who recognized her genius. As Laura examined these materials late into the night, she heard the front door open downstairs. Harrison Craig stood in the drawing room when she descended the stairs, rain dripping from his expensive coat, a gun held casually at his side. He demanded all of Eleonora's materials, explaining with chilling calmness that his family's fortune and reputation had been built on his grandfather's claimed musical innovations. Innovations stolen from Eleonora before he killed her and concealed her body. Laura realized with horror that Emily wasn't safe in Atlanta, she was simply away from the protection of the house. As panic rose in her throat, a sudden gust of cold air swept through the room. The lights flickered and went out, plunging the house into darkness broken only by flashes of lightning from the storm outside. In the intermittent illumination, Laura saw the piano lid slam open with violent force. Sheet music swirled through the air as though caught in a whirlwind. Doors throughout the house began slamming open and closed, and an invisible force knocked the gun from Craig's hand and pushed him away from Laura. Using the distraction, Laura fled to the hidden room in the attic, barricading the door behind her. There, by flashlight, she discovered one final letter from Eleonora hidden in a secret compartment of the writing desk. The letter contained specific directions to where Eleonora had hidden evidence against William Craig, along with the location where she feared her body would be found if she failed to escape, a walled-up section of the old garden shed. The police, alerted by James who had grown concerned when Laura didn't answer his calls, arrived to find Harrison Craig unconscious in the drawing room. The storm had mysteriously ceased and the house was once again still and silent. In his possession, they found documents revealing his plans to develop the property into condominiums once he had secured and destroyed Eleonora's work to protect his family legacy. Following the directions in Eleonora's letter, investigators discovered human remains in exactly the location she had described. Forensic analysis confirmed they belonged to a female in her 20s, with injuries consistent with blunt force trauma. Personal effects found with the remains matched descriptions of items Eleonora had been wearing when last seen. After 70 years, her murder was finally solved and William Craig was posthumously implicated in her death. 1 year after the dramatic events at Pierce Manor, the house had undergone a remarkable transformation. Using the proceeds from publishing Eleonora's work with full attribution and recognition of her genius, Laura had been able to completely restore the mansion to its former glory. The first floor now housed the Eleonora Pierce School of Music, offering scholarships to young musicians from underprivileged backgrounds. The once overgrown grounds had been landscaped into beautiful gardens featuring a memorial to Eleonora at its center. Emily, whose musical talent had continued to flourish, became the youngest student ever accepted to Savannah's prestigious conservatory program. She spoke matter-of-factly about her lessons with Eleonora's spirit, whose presence in the house had grown more peaceful since the discovery of her remains and the restoration of her legacy. James Foster, whose support had never wavered throughout the ordeal, had become an integral part of their lives. His quiet proposal to Laura came during a moonlit walk through the gardens and they planned to hold their wedding ceremony there in the spring. The supernatural occurrences in the house had mostly subsided, though occasionally they would still hear the faint sound of piano music late at night, no longer frantic or demanding but serene and celebratory. At the grand opening concert of the music school, Laura sat in the audience as a full orchestra performed Eleonora's finally completed symphony. The piece, finished by contemporary composers working from her detailed notes, received a standing ovation from the filled concert hall. As the applause thundered around her, Laura caught a glimpse of a young woman in a vintage dress standing in the back of the hall, her smile radiant before she seemed to dissolve into the play of light from the chandeliers. Whether it was a trick of the imagination or Eleonora's final farewell, Laura couldn't be certain. But as she returned home to Pierce Manor that night, the house felt truly at peace for the first time, not just a shelter they had stumbled upon in desperation, but a legacy they had been meant to protect and a home where both the living and the memories of the past could coexist in harmony.